Our speakers, William Brown is a technology solution professional at Microsoft. He's spoken to this group many times over the years, and on lots of business intelligence related topics. And he is joined by Sravanthi Gandu, who is new to Microsoft, and they team up on different work that they're doing for their customers. And so she's a technical specialist for Power Platform, and has worked in several other capacities prior to that, including a data warehouse architect at Caribou Coffee. So with that, let me turn things over to Sravanthi is going to go first. So I will stop my share.
1 second, let me start my screen share. So I am new to Microsoft, like Mark said, but I have about like 9 years of experience in the BI field. I worked as a BI engineer, as a ETL engineer. I worked with a lot of BI tools, including MicroStrategy, Tableau, a lot of ETL tools, SSIS, Talent, and all that. But being worked with different BI tools, by far, Power BI is my most favorite tool. So today I'll talk about a topic called incremental refreshes in Power BI. So just to set some context about why we need incremental refreshes in Power BI. So initially, I'm sure you're aware of this dataset size limit in Power BI. There is a 10 GB limit in Premium, but now Premium supports a large data model. Like it can be up to 400 gigabytes. Some folks say, but it's as big as it's limited to your capacity size. It's as big as your Power BI Premium capacity allows you to host, right? So it's a similar concept in Azure Analysis Services. It's the same thing, right? The model can be as big as your server can allow it to be. So it's a similar concept there. So now that Power BI Premium is allowing huge data set, how do you build those data sets in your desktop, right? In your Power BI desktop, you cannot import that huge data set into your Power BI desktop. It's going to slow down a lot of things. Power BI file is limited to the memory resources on your computer. So somehow, even if you try to manage to import this huge data set, the refreshes will be very painful. It's going to take a long time. And while you do refreshes, everything else on your computer will be frozen. So, and for example, if you have 20 years worth of data, you may not need to refresh all the data from going back to 20 years. Only the last 5 days data is current. Who knows, right? Typically, the cases are like if you're in a retail industry, only last 5 or 10 days data is current, and the rest of the data is not changing. It's just stagnant. This is where the incremental refreshes come into picture. I've listed some benefits of incremental refreshes here. So refreshes are faster because only the data that has changed is refreshing, and the refreshes are more reliable. This morning, me and William were on a call, and we heard a customer talking about dataset refresh taking about 5 hours or something like that. But it's no longer necessary with the incremental refreshes. You don't have to maintain this long running connections to your source systems, and your source systems may not be able to handle this long running queries, right? So, and another thing is resource consumption is like drastically reduced. So overall, the consumption of the memory, since you're limiting the data, the consumption of the memory is also less. So those are some of the benefits. So let's jump into a quick demo, how to set up the incremental refreshes in the desktop, and then then I'll show you how it will reflect in the Power BI service. So this is a report that I built. It's a simple report. I have data from 2013 to 2016. I'm showing sales by buying group by year. And I have sales by year and by territory. I have a nice graph here with the access title. You can play access. and a simple bar graph. So it's nothing too complicated. This is my model, all the fields here, all the columns, all the tables here. It's not a very complicated model, but I do have some tables, these fact tables. If you see fact sales, fact transactions, these are huge tables, right? And the data is not continuously changing. It's only like last 1 year's data is more actively changing, and the previous year's data is not changing. So I have data from 2013, right? So my 2013 data is not changing. So if you go here and click on the fact sale and click on the ellipsis here, you will see an option called incremental refresh here. So I clicked on it, and it can be enabled on any table, but right now I'm choosing fact sale for the demo purposes. So I'm trying to enable this. This is, you cannot enable this. It says before you set up incremental refresh on this table, you need to set up parameters. So this incremental refreshes require you to set up certain parameters, certain reserved parameters. Okay, let's see how we can create the parameters. I'm going to home, and I'm going to do transform data or edit queries. And I have manage parameters here. I'm going to manage parameters, and all you have to do is click new parameter. But for this demo purpose, I've already created my parameters, because I don't want this demo to go wrong, because it's very important that you set up these parameters in a particular way. So this has to be the name. These are reserved parameters. Power BI will not know if you name it something else. If you say range, start with, if there is a spelling mistake in it, it won't take it. If you just say start, it won't understand it. Same thing for range. And if these are reserved parameters, it has to be spelled this way, definitely. And also, they have to be a date time. I have lost a lot of time. I've set it up as a date parameter, and the incremental refreshes didn't work. So it's a big tip. Save some time, set it up as date time. And I have set up some values in the current values. So my range start is 2016, and then my range end is 2017 here. I have this parameter set up. Now I want to tie it to my table. So I have this fact sale table, and I want to set up my parameters on this delivery date key. Okay, so just a little bit, one step back. My source, this column, in my source, this column is not date time. It is date, but to make this work, to make this incremental refresh work, all I did is I changed this data type to date type. So if you see in this column, in this step, I added a time to this date. It's just 12 a.m. It added it once I changed it to date time. So it's important that you set it up as a date time. Even though your source is does not have a date time field, you can change it in the edit queries. So I'm going to select this, and I'm going to do filters. And I'm going to go to custom filter. Okay. And I'm going to set it up as after or equal to, and then I'm going to select parameter here, and it's selected range start. And and I'm going to, for range end, I'm going to select is before parameter and range end. I've set it up. I've set up the filters here. So it's important to set it up like this, is after or equal to and is before. So I'll explain you a little bit later in the later steps, but behind the scenes, Power BI creates partitions to handle incremental refresh. So make sure your your filters don't overlap. If you set like is before or equal to, then you will have duplicate rows in 2 different partitions. To avoid that, try to set it up carefully. So make sure you set it up without any overlaps. Click OK, and I'm going to do close and apply. So my dataset will now refresh. So I've basically applied a filter here. So it's completely, this fact sale table is being refreshed again, and it's being filtered to only the current year, which is 2016, the last year that I have. So this is what I have now. Before I had all the years, but now I only have 1 year, because in your desktop, there is no point in importing all this data when you're just building it, right? So you don't want to utilize all your resources on your desktop, especially when you're building the report. So now I have applied the parameters, and now if I go here, manage incremental refresh, now I can enable it. So by the way, this range start and range end parameters, they can be used on other tables as well. I have other fact tables here. I have fact movement, purchase, and orders. You can apply it to those tables as well. But for demo, I'm just using fact sale. Now I can enable it. I turned it on, and it's asking me, like, what rows do you want to store from this column? So I want to store last 7 years worth of data. By the way, you can, it doesn't have to be years. You can select days, months, quarters, and years. For now, I'm just selecting years. And I want to refresh last 1 year's data. So in this context, 1 year is 2020, and 7 years is from 2013 to 2019 is 7 years, right? So, it's storing 7 years data, and it refreshes 1 year data. And you also have other options here. Detect data changes. So I have this 1 year data, but I don't want to refresh it unless something changed in this column, right? You can set up like so what it does is it caches the maximum value in this field, and it looks for, like, whenever there is a change in this field, then only it refreshes. If there is no change in that column, there's no point in saving the refresh, in doing the refresh, right? You can still save more resources. This is efficient, and this is ultra efficient. So for now, I'm not gonna select this. And you also have another option here, only for complete year. So there will be certain organizations where, you know, they don't want to see half the data. Let's say you're comparing in a finance organization, you're comparing like 2 weeks data, last week's data with this week. If this week is incomplete, then it doesn't make any sense, right? So we only have half week's data, and you're comparing it. If you want to avoid that, you can even select this option. And now I'm just gonna say apply all. So my incremental, it's simple. Few clicks, my incremental refresh is done. I'm just gonna click publish here. But to save time, my tenant is different, not my Microsoft default tenant. It takes a lot of time to publish, so I already published it. Let's go back to my tenant. So this is the report here. If you see, even though my desktop is filtered to 2016 only, 1 year only, but it doesn't have any impact on, so the data doesn't really get filtered in the Power BI service. It's only behind the scenes, it's used for refreshes. For nothing else it's used, right? So I still see all my data, 2013, 2014, 2016 data. And let me show you something else on the data settings, dataset settings. If you go to the settings here, if you go to parameters, usually you see the parameters, right? When you have certain parameters set up in your edit queries, you have them available here. But since these are reserved parameters, you don't see them here. So they are only reserved for incremental refresh. You cannot edit them, you cannot change them. You can go back to edit query and change it, but you cannot change it from the service. It's completely invisible. You must be thinking like, you know, how do I trust her? She didn't even publish the report. She must be lying. She's the first time speaker in this meetup. Why do I trust her? So this is a perfect segue for my next, for the next topic by William Braun. He's going to talk about XMLA endpoints. He's going to do an amazing job. He's going to dig deep into the new XMLA endpoints feature. So, but just as a segue, so now that XMLA endpoints are enabled, what you can do is you can connect to your workspace in the Power BI as though you're connecting to your analysis services server. So I just went here to workspace settings, and I went to the premium. And by the way, this is the premium only feature, a premium pro, and it's also, I think, available for shared subscriptions and shared data sets. So I go here, I copy the link, I'm just going to cancel it here. And I'm in SSMS. This has to be a 2018 version or later. If you do it with other versions, like lower versions, it doesn't work. So go to analysis services here, just as if you're connecting to an analysis services, just copy it here. Right, and it might ask me to sign in. This is my username. Yeah, so I connected to this test workspace where I deployed my incremental refresh report, and you see, so I have 2 data sets in that workspace, and each data set is considered as a, you can think of it as a database in analysis server. Okay, so I'm going to expand this. I'm going to expand the tables here. So if you go and right click on the fact sale table, if you do partitions, it created, so I told it to refresh only current year's data and store 7 years data, right? So it is smart enough. It created 7 years partitions, which is not going to refresh when I do the refresh on the server, but it also created another partition for current year, which is 2020. And if you see the last process date, these are old. And if you see this 2020, when I hit refresh right before the session, I hit refresh and it only refreshed this partition. It didn't refresh all these partitions. It would have made more sense if I had data till 2020, but that's the essence, right? So it's storing all this data. It's not refreshing it, but when you hit refresh, it refreshes the current partition. So let's say you might be thinking like, what if my 2013 data changed and I want to refresh it? You just come here and just do process your partition, just like how you would do it in analysis services. If there are any analysis services folks, you know how much effort it takes to set up partitions and to maintain them and all that, right? So to refresh them. So, but with incremental refreshes, with few clicks, you're able to do this. So this is the essence now, we are bringing the enterprise BI capabilities to Power BI. It's both self-service and enterprise. If you want it to be low code, it can be low code. If you want it to be like, pro code with a lot of development, you can make it happen too. So that's about it. And there is one drawback for this. If you go to the report, once you enable the incremental refresh, it won't let you to download this PBIX file. I wish this is not the case, but you have to maintain your desktop file. So you cannot, once it is deployed to the server, you cannot download it back to the desktop file from the server. So that was the biggest backdrop for this feature. I think I've covered all the points. Like, Mark, do you want to pass it off to William, or what do you want to do here?
Yep, works for me. It's a good segue for me.
Yeah.
All
okay,
right.
I'm going to stop my share.
And I'm going to start. Thank you. And that was a good segue. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I am trying to, well, one day I'll remember to click the share button. And I'm going to segue into a right about from there and talk about how some of this works internally. And more importantly, what happens if incremental refresh doesn't cut it. And this is talking about a lot of premium stuff here, folks, by the way, so don't be too surprised. And what's important about this, and Sravanthi said it at the end, Power BI has always been a great self-service tool, easy for users to use and build and do things. And incremental refresh was actually something I bet against them ever putting inside the Power BI desktop engine. I was wrong. I swear they listen to what I say and then they do the opposite. It seems to be the way they write specifications for Power BI. However, I'm an old hand at analysis services, and as much as I love Power BI, I always feel just a little bit handicapped. So we're going to talk about XMLA endpoints and how that can improve your processing, and more importantly, let you customize things. We'll open up my Power BI environment, and again, this is a demo environment. And what I wanted to get at here was, this is also a premium feature, and like Sravanthi was saying, these I can go up under my settings and I can get that particular URL for connecting. And this is a really useful URL to know because you can connect to it through a number of different tools, including Tableau as a client. So this is, I think, one of the big selling points about Power BI is it's not a closed ecology. You can do a lot of things with it using third-party tools and custom codes. So to make this actually work, though, is just to point out that you need to, and I always lose track of where I am. It's up here. Up here under the settings, under the admin portal, we have our various capacities. This always takes about 5 seconds longer than I want it to. And someone's been playing. Arun, that's interesting. Arun's the GM for the product. I didn't know he actually, he's getting his hands dirty. That's awesome. Anyway, I'm going to go into the capacity just to show you what you can do here. But under the workloads that it supports, give it a second again, there's a lot of settings you can do to control the usage of a premium node. It's a server, so we're putting more and more management into it so that you can control how it's used. But this is the key one. There are XMLA endpoints, and Microsoft refers to this functionality as XMLA, which is the least marketing-friendly term Microsoft has ever used, and that is a long history of unfriendly marketing terms. But you can leave it off, which means none of this stuff works, which you might actually want to do to manage the resource. You can leave it read-only, which means it's a query engine, which means you can write queries and you can see what's in it. I'm hoping I'm still sharing. Something flickered on my screen. And I have read-write, which is what I'm actually going to work in today. So with that in mind, what I'm going to take off is exactly where Sravanthi left off. Is I can come in here and I can log into that endpoint, and I've already connected to it. I should still be connected to it. And I can see all the databases that are out there. Now, because of this, and you can see I have an incremental as well, same idea, and I can see the same set of partitions. And this is fabulous for being able to load data. You know, I have all my data, and you can see this is the case where I'm doing it monthly for several years. It created all the partitions, and what it will do on an automatic basis is, because I've told it to keep n number of months of data, when I load the next month, it will actually append a month on and drop a month off automatically. As a X-analysis or a reformed analysis services developer, I'm not sure what the right term is, this was always at least 2 weeks of consulting to get working right. I mean, it was just a lot of tedious work to get all that process working, and this stuff just works out of the box. Okay, now as I'm up here, by the way, you can do everything that tool does through code, and I think that and through different interfaces. So I can create new partitions, I can edit a partition, I can delete it, I can remove data, I can clone them, I can process them, and I can view the properties. But I can do all of that here. But what I think one of the cool things you can do inside this tool, and remember, this is just querying it. I don't even need read-write access to this point. I can click on a partition, and I can script it. And it's going to create a piece of JSON, and this is XMLA. Actually, it's funny is it's called XMLA because the original protocol for analysis services, this would have generated a XML file. And we've kind of, I won't say abandoned XML, but we rapidly realized it was way too complicated for what we really needed, and we invented JSON. So this really should be called JSON-A, but it doesn't rhyme nearly as well, so we still call it XMLA. It's creating a JSON file of everything you need to use to create or replace inside the object database table, a partition, import mode, and then the start and end range. All of this is being programmatically generated by the Power BI engine to make all of these things happen. Great. Now, this is really useful, and where it gets, in the sense that this solves, I would say, some % of the problems kind of automatically for you. However, I don't think it solves all of your problems. And that's where the developer pro dev thing comes in. This is where XMLA gets really interesting, is we're no longer limited by the Power BI desktop engine tool for building things. Now, I'm actually going to fire up, and I've already started it up, which is a bit of cheating, but you know, we are in a limited time frame. This is Visual Studio 2019. There is a community version of it. There is a project type for analysis services. And if you look at it, and the trick to using this engine, this development tool, is you have to learn, you can ignore about 80% of the buttons. Most of this stuff is not actually relevant for you as developers building out data models. And that's because it's a generic tool. But once you've installed that extension, you're going to have the ability to create an analysis services project and add data sources. And I can, at that point, start doing things like under extensions. If I can make I can say things like, wow, I'm having a hard time with my mouse, you know, get data, process data, basically import tables into my model to be used just like I do it inside the Power BI engine. The look and feel is going to be very, very similar here. In fact, if I bring up the little gauge, you'll see I only did 2 tables because I was lazy and in a bit of a hurry. But you can see here I can bring in multiple tables from multiple sources. I can build relationships between things. It looks a lot like the Power BI desktop engine, except for a couple of cool things. You can actually check this code into source control if you like. It will check in the XMLA, the text file for all of this. I have all of my tables. Now, while you're in here, and this is a little bit off topic, but I did want to point out, this opens up new things that we cannot do in the Power BI desktop. And I'm going to deviate a little bit here because I think they're really useful to understand that there is more to what goes on inside Power BI than what you've seen. I'm going to give you a big caveat. One of the next desktop releases coming out is going to open up more, open it up to external tools. So you'll be able to extend, you may not need to use Visual Studio in the near future. And I'll show you a couple of alternatives. But what I wanted to get at here was, there's a few things you can do here that you cannot do on the desktop today, and you might want to start doing. And if I look under extensions, under model, we have translations. Has anybody ever wanted to show, instead of the English word for year, you want to show the French word for year? So we can actually build in translations for all the objects in my system. So I've already built a translation for France. So I'm going to go through and grab France, and you know what? I'll grab another one at random. I'd say random, but I want to do something I recognize. German. And I am, oops, I just did something and I did it wrong. Model. But this will let me do is export out a JSON file of the translations. And if I did this right, and I think I have it right here into my documents. Oh, I clicked it too fast. Hold on. Well, it opened it up as a JSON file. You can see here, it will actually generate a file of all the objects in my database, date, and then I can put in, for various fields, the translation for them. And I didn't do it on all of them, but you can see for year I have well, what I don't know how to pronounce my French. It's been a long time since high school. But I can actually build translations for all my fields. So when someone logs in whose culture, whose language setting is set to France, they won't see English words, they'll see the French words. And I have a hand raise, so what the heck? I don't know how to do this stuff. I'm still new to Zoom. You want to ask your question in the chat? I thought I had the chat open. Might be easier than me stumbling through it.
Yeah, it's gone now.
Oh, it's gone, okay. But anyway, now I can actually maintain my translations for all my objects here and import them back in. And that way my users all over the world will see the terms in labels that they actually they actually understand. Second big thing you can do, and again, it's also among my favorite features, and one I desperately missed from the product, was perspectives. So perspectives are the ability in really complicated models, and again, I'm talking really complicated models with lots of tables and lots of columns. I may not want the average user getting in there and getting lost. So a perspective is the ability to create a view on top of my data that only shows certain fields. So for example, in this case, I'm going to show only, like year and discount amount and discount quantity. Where I've done this before is I've created particular views on top of my data that hide a lot of the complexity for initial users, and then as they got used to the tool and added for more data, I would simply reveal things through perspectives. So it is a good way of building one complicated model, but allowing users to have simplified views of the world. So there's a lot more in here than just doing kind of incremental updates of your data. And the last one, and I wish I had an example for it, is calculation groups. This allows you to build generic calculations that apply across all of your measures. So instead of building year-to-date for sales and discounts and returns, you can build a single calculation that will apply to all of your measures. And this could be this is a really useful way to genericize your calculations. This is actually fairly well documented, but what I wanted to get at here is the minute we start leaving the Power BI desktop, we are now have the ability to build very, very fine-tooth control over our environments and add things that we could not possibly have done in the desktop, at least not right now. Now, inside of that, I should point out, as you're able to, once you build one of these things, let me go click on the right step. Where's my properties? There we go. One of these has it. There we go. Under my project properties, I simply tell it what server I want to deploy to, the database name, and of course, and the model name. And that's all I need to do. And it will actually take it. And if I click on build, it will deploy all the objects. Now, what it won't do is process it. And for the first time you do this, it will throw an error because it does not pass the credentials along. With the first time you do it, you're going to have to go back into here, watch it error out, and then go into the data model, click on settings. Wow, come on. Few issues all day, something going crazy on my machine. And I can set the data credentials here. Come on. Just go do this. There we go. I go into the settings. Yeah, there we go. Low system resource. I just got the warning from Zoom. Every so often, my CPU is just going completely nuts. And then it recovers again. And I would set the ID, and I've already done it here. But the first time you do, you're going to get an error message. Set the credentials, and then process it, and you'll be good to go. So that's how you might build and deploy something inside endpoints. And I didn't get into partitioning there, but inside that engine, inside the Visual Studio environment that I was in before.
William, you're breaking up, William. You're breaking up.
Yeah, that's my CPU. I'm going to close a few things. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
I've been having some weird quit that. I'm hoping that helps out. Am I back yet?
Yes.
That's a little better. Yeah, I don't know what happens every so often. I'm going to re-image my machine or reinstall everything like tomorrow, I think. Sorry about that. So I just say is the one thing I didn't do is I can come in here just like the software did for it. I can come in here and manage my partitions. So every table you build inside Power BI, this is true of the desktop or here, we end up with a table, and every table has at least one partition. There's a one-to-one mapping here, but here I can click on my partitions and I can start creating new partitions. And I got to type my password in. There's my logic. I can clone this partition, rewrite my SQL, and go on with my day and create all my partitions by hand. And that's fine, and then I can run these. Now, this is all done if you want to do things manually. Like I want to update my cube, or I want to update a partition or something, but maybe I want to automate things. And I think that's where I want to get into how we automate this entire process, or much of this process as we can. So with that said, the ability to process things becomes a something we can do through a number of different tools. And I'm going to start with PowerShell. And I need to move over to the right screen. And I need to clear out that. 1 second, I just got to clear out my, there we go. Now, I'm going to ask yourself is, how do we do these things? Well, I'm hoping I don't do anything silly. Good. So this is, now mind you, I've already done this first part here. This is PowerShell. It's PowerShell 5.0. And this is, by the way, everything I'm doing here is in public preview. So things don't always work exactly as advertised. There's reasons for it. But this first step here is actually how I store my credentials so I can connect. And I've already done it. So I've already have my credentials canned and stored. So this is not my password. So not my password. So I've already actually built my credentials just a little bit earlier, but there's actually a module called for SQL Server. And I can now, once I have my credentials, using that server connection, the table name, database name, and refresh type and credentials, I can do all kinds of interesting things. For example, has anybody ever had a table that gets updated? You add a new customer on, or you change a bunch of customer attributes through an update statement. And in Power BI, if I want to load that, even with incremental update, I have to reload the entire database. Not now. I can go in here and I can do anything I can do through the APIs. I can do this through PowerShell, which means I can do it through Azure Functions. And my next hobby is to actually set it up so I can run these things through Power Automate, which is just an API call. Shouldn't be that hard to set up. So I'm just going to run it right now, and I've actually just reprocessed a single table. So if you want to update a table and not the entire database, this can be a much faster way to do it. So I've been asked for years for the ability to process pieces of a database and not the entire thing. You know, update a single table, because the entire database process, Power BI dataset process, might take an hour. Well, I could update a single dimension in just a few minutes. And that's all it did. It basically kicked off the XMLA command and shipped it up to the cloud service, and then ran my updates. Now, everything I do, and by the way, there's a lot more functions in here than just that, I can do through this XMLA. So I can grab a single partition, and actually, if you look at the table I updated, I have a table that I deployed called Developer Model for Sales, and I have one partition called Query. I can kick that off. If I got all those settings right, it's going to go through and re-update that partition following that exact logic to lay out my entire environment. So it's going to take a little bit longer, and it gets back a result set, and I've updated my data. Again, without having to, and because it's in Premium, I can execute this as many times as I want. There's no limit on the number of refreshes with Premium. I can run this as often as I want, which if you have a small partition window and you're clever about your partitioning, you can set your partitions up at any level of grain you want. I once had a system where I had 30 days of daily data. I had actually 2 years of monthly data, 30 days of daily data, and for the current day, I had a whole bunch of partitions that were 15 minutes. And I was loading every 15 minutes, I was loading a new partition. And at the end of the day, I would merge partitions and build my single days partition and restart my process. It was a lot of code to write, but my data had all the advantages of the analysis service in-memory model, but my data only had a 15-minute latency behind it, which is a really kind of cool thing to build. Now, if you want to automate the process of building your models, and this is where you can simplify your life and speed things up quite a bit. Go find my file here. I'm actually going to use an input file. Let me just open this up with Notepad. There we go. You can see here, this is that same partition, or actually, the different partition has a different name, not just query, which was my bad name ahead of time, but it's for a particular month and particular year, and there's my SQL statement on all of that. So I can execute, invoke the AS command, and pass that XMLA command up. Just run it. It's done. Now if I jump back to my management studio, and I think I haven't actually tested this for certain, but I'm going to refresh it just to be brave. And there it is. I just created it with 0 rows in it. And of course, now I could just kick off and process the partition. But I could build a number of different XMLA files and continue modifying my file to build all of the partitions I want. All you have to do, and mind you, I say all you have to do, it's a reasonable amount of work. I mean, you're basically having to build a text file of the settings that you want that meet your needs, and then execute. I can find all of these things to create all of your partitions. Now, it means you can replace your partitions with new partitions and roll them out. So coming up with a good partitioning strategy is actually a reasonable amount of work. But to do it, you have to kind of understand what your business requirements are. If you look at how Power BI does it, it has some very straightforward business requirements. It's how much history do you want to keep? How much data do you want to refresh every time? But it doesn't take into account things like, hey, we restated the data from 2 years ago. Can you just reload that one single partition? To do that, you have to do a full refresh of the entire Power BI data set. In this case, I don't have to, because I can simply, run one of these commands on an ad hoc basis and run that partition. What I used to do was keep a track of my dirty data in a table, and by tracking what months had data that needed to be processed, I could decide what months needed to be processed through an XMLA command. So you have a lot of fine-tooth control over exactly when each one of your dimensions and tables and so forth get processed. Now, I have a little bit longer on some of this, and XMLA offers just so many benefits for people who are building things. And again, some of my personal favorites is, I used to do this all the time. Actually, I would do it every morning. Before I actually came in, I had a little SQL job that would run, and it would actually script out my entire database, my development database of all the settings. Everything I needed to recreate this file. So you can actually create your entire database by scripting it out and then rerunning the environment. And rerunning the environment here, and have a new copy. So if your database is corrupted or breaks, or you make some horrible change and you want to undo it, you have a very lightweight backup of your entire environment. Now, I want to get a little bit to futures around a couple of things why I'm here. And I do want to point out, I should point out one other thing that's important. If you're in here and it gets confusing, this file has a number of settings. If you ever connect to Power BI doing this, you're going to want to make sure you use this compatibility level. Once you set this, you can't change it, because this tells it how to generate that JSON file of what features are available. But this is the right version to use. If you have a problem developing it, I spent a little bit of time trying to figure this out. It's under the model BIM file. This is where all the logic is stored, and it will tell you the compatibility settings. Now, Visual Studio, if you look at all these features, is a little bit convoluted. There's a lot of features in it, a lot of buttons, and if you look at all of these things, Most of them are irrelevant for the BI developer, and it can be quite confusing. The openness of Power BI has meant third-party people are writing tools. And Microsoft is actually extending the desktop to support those third-party tools as well. So one of my personal favorites is DAX Studio. I've connected same exact way. I connect using that same endpoint, but now I can view all of my environments, and I can actually do things like, and I think I can run this command. There we go. It's just running the query now. I can actually write MDX, I can write DAX queries against my environment to see my data and export data out of it. So we have query tools that will let us investigate the environment using the XMLA endpoints. But the tool I just downloaded in anticipation of this, and I don't have it running, is the Tabular Editor. This is a third-party tool. It's free to use, but it gives you all of the features and functionalities you need for building the analysis services model without using Visual Studio. This is actually so popular. One of the next revs of the Power BI desktop will have the ability to register external tools. So you'll be able to be in the desktop, open up the external tools for modifying the model you're working on. So there's going to be interop between the Power BI desktop and the Tabular Editor side by side. And Microsoft's really doing a lot of this to improve people's productivity and to open up the product for a kind of enterprise level functionality. The ability to create robust models that are much more complicated, much richer than stuff that we might be okay doing inside, just inside the Power BI desktop. I can build a lot of fancy things with the Power BI desktop, but with the analysis services engine, I can build things that I would not have been able to do before that. So I ended a few minutes before 8, which is odd, but I usually long-winded. Do anybody have any questions before we end this?
There was one question from Rajesh about the incremental refreshes, not about the
All right.
XMLA.
I didn't see it, so go ahead, take it.
Yeah, so the question is, can I implement incremental refresh using OData feed? Yes, you can implement OData, incremental refresh with OData sources. Anything that supports query folding, like where you can pass a where condition to the source, filter it, then you can implement incremental refresh, but you cannot do it on sources like flat files, blobs, or web pages where you cannot actually query the data. You cannot filter the data. So that's the case for incremental refresh.
Okay,
another one in you. Yep.
I don't see any other
There's
questions.
one in the Q&A session.
Oh, there is. Okay. Let's
Yeah.
look at
I'm entering the data flow.
Okay.
You see it, or I have an entity in the data
please
flow.
go
And
ahead.
I'm just reading it out loud. I have an entity in the data flow, and it's set to keep the last 5 years and refresh 2 years, so incremental refresh. Now I create a data set, and I want to incremental refresh in 3 years and 1. I don't see why not. Those are completely, the data set logic and the data flow logic would be independent from each other. Yeah, you could set the data flow logic up against and have your data set logic would be different. Can be different than your data flow logic for loads.
Yep. And what happens when you hit refresh data on individual table?
It reloads the table.
Set up,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's set up. You're applying the parameters at individual tables. So wherever you apply these parameters and enable incremental refresh, it happens only on that table.
Now, it could bring in like values, dimension values, or row values that don't have any corresponding value in another table. For example, if you updated your fact data and it brought in a new customer, and that customer was and you didn't update your customer table. So there's a mismatch in my data, right? Customer 901 is in my fact table, but customer 901 is not in my customer table. Power BI automatically creates a blank member in customer to shove that data into to show that you have an issue between those two data sets, that the tables are out of sync. So we will never drop the data between them, but it will simply create a null or a blank customer for that data.
Okay, I don't see any other questions either in Q&A or in chat. I did in the chat show the URL where people will be able to find the recording of this meeting and also recordings of some past meetings. We're a couple of meetings behind, and we're getting caught up posting those, and so we'll get this posted. There are a few people who've let me know they just couldn't make it, or one person let me know they couldn't log in for some reason, and so the recording will be available in the coming days. So Sravanthi and William, thank you so much for agreeing to speak tonight, and very interesting topics, complimentary, and thank you to everyone who attended.